All right, everyone, welcome to the Sovereign CEO podcast. I am Carla Joy Treadway, and I have with me today Mr. John Carpay. Welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be with you, Carla.
I'm very excited for this conversation. I've been following your work for a while. I worked for the documentary team that filmed the convoy. I assisted with a few different cities, so I've been watching the JCCF for a while. If my listeners aren't aware of the work that you do, you're a Netherlands-born Canadian lawyer. You're the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. You're a podcaster, a newspaper columnist. Um, Anything else there? Who is John for the listeners?
Well, I grew up in British Columbia. I came to Canada at the age of 7, moved into a small town in northwestern BC that's called Kitimat, which became a little bit famous because there was potentially going to be some resource development pipeline, something or other. So Kitimat, small town, 14,000 people. We were the only Dutch-speaking family in town. I learned English very quickly. Had no choice, and I did my undergrad at Laval University in Quebec City in political science. I became fluent in French because that was the language of instruction when I was studying the political science. Lived in Ottawa for a while, worked briefly on Parliament Hill, moved back to BC. And then about 28 years ago, I moved to Calgary to go to law school. And I'm still living in Calgary now. And I worked for a few years for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, advocating for lower taxes, less waste, accountable government. And it's just a real honor these last 14 years to be with the Justice Centre. We have grown to become Canada's leading defender of rights and freedoms. We were the only registered charity in Canada that was against the lockdowns and against the vaccine passports. Other civil liberties groups kind of sat back, they, analyzed, commented, but we sued governments all across Canada in defense of the right of bodily autonomy and fighting against all the harms that the lockdowns have inflicted on Canadians, which many people are still suffering from the harm that was done.
Mhm. So this is not your first rodeo. This work for you didn't start in 2020. You're already in the business of holding the government accountable for a long period of time. When did that start?
Well, the Justice Center was started in 2010. In the first few years, when we were a lot smaller, about half of our work was defending campus free speech rights for students that would get, nasty letters from university officials threatening expulsion if they expressed unpopular views on campus. We scored court victories against the University of Calgary, the University of Alberta. We had an interesting case in Hamilton, Ontario, where there was a loving foster parents couple had taken two very vulnerable girls into their care who could not be with their biological parents, and everything was going perfectly until the social worker said, "Well, Easter is approaching. What are you going to do for Easter? Are you going to tell the girls about the Easter bunny?" And the foster parents said, "Well, no, we think that would be lying to the children, and that's against our religious convictions. We'll certainly have an Easter egg hunt. We're going to have a lot of fun. We'll tell them it was mom and dad that hid the eggs." And for their unwillingness to tell these young girls that the Easter Bunny is real, for that reason and that reason alone, the Hamilton Social Services Agency removed the girls from their care and put them elsewhere. We don't know what happened to the girls, but it was not as good of a care that they were getting. And so we took this to court, and the ultimately we secured a court ruling that government agencies cannot discriminate against foster parents on the basis of religious belief. And so that's an example of we go to bat for the little guy, and we provide the legal services free of charge. We have staff lawyers that are paid thanks to donations, and people can get legal representation in situations where otherwise, unless you've got $500,000 or $250,000 in the bank, you can't defend yourself. And so the Justice Center provides lawyers for Canadians when their rights and freedoms are threatened.
Did when you first went into law, is this where you thought you would end up? Like, did you have a more innocent view of the law when you initially went to law school? Like, what has changed for you, or did you already kind of have a sense that there was something skewed in law?
When I went to law school in 1995, constitutional law was my favorite course, hands down, and I did want to practice in this area. So I did have a general sense. I had no idea that I would be starting a nonprofit and that it would grow to become uh, the largest and leading defender of rights and freedoms in Canada. I had no idea that that would happen. The the sad thing is that we have grown because there has been so much injustice, because you've had federal, provincial, and municipal governments that violate our freedoms of expression, religion, conscience, association, peaceful assembly, the charter right to bodily autonomy that was severely violated by the travel restrictions. And so it's the injustice of it that has caused us to grow. Like ideally, I would like it if the governments were all respecting our rights and freedoms, then our donations would dry up and we would disappear, and that would be perfectly fine. But it looks like that's not happening anytime soon.
Um, I'm going to go right to a big question here. What I have learned from the last few years is there's the law, but then there's how it's actually going to be treated in court. And those are two very different things. And I think we saw that during COVID, there's a lot of people studying the law and standing on the law, but there have been many, many things that have been passed based on judgment. And I think sometimes people maybe feel falsely protected. Well, this is the law. They say I have this right, but then when push comes to shove and it actually goes to court, a lot of people are not being protected. We saw that throughout COVID. What is happening there, and is that new since 2020?
Well, the enemy's fear. Fear is the enemy, and a great historical example. Great in the sense that it's good for illustrative purposes, not great in the sense of what happened. But in in the middle of World War II, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941, and so Canada and the United States declared war on Japan. Previously, Canada had been fighting only Germany and Japan. Anyway, people were scared of a land invasion by Japan. They were scared that Japanese troops would land in British Columbia, uh, California, Oregon, Washington State. And so the Americans forcibly moved Japanese Americans inland to the interior to get them away from the coast. I haven't studied that closely, but I have studied closely the Canadian situation. And there was a large Japanese Canadian community in the city of Richmond, just south of Vancouver, and elsewhere in Greater Vancouver. And people were scared that if the Japanese invaded, then these Japanese Canadians would assist the enemy. Now, those fears were baseless. And in fact, the RCMP reported to the federal government and said, these Japanese Canadians here in Canada are not a threat. Many of them are second generation, third generation Canadians. They don't even speak Japanese. We have found a half dozen or so bad apples, and we've rounded them up, and they're looked after. So we've taken care of the tiny number of people that would be a potential security threat. So everything's fine. But no, the federal government forcibly moved Japanese Canadians, and their fishing boats were confiscated without compensation. Their property was taken away from them. They were never compensated in many cases, and they had to live in these work camps in the interior of BC for the duration of the war. That all happened because of fear. And so in 2020, we got this fear of COVID, which was not warranted, not justified. COVID was real, but it was a threat to elderly people in nursing homes. It was not a threat to the whole population. The government's own data shows that the impact on population mortality was minimal. That's not my opinion. That's the facts of the government data. And yet the fear persisted. And I think that some judges were corrupted by that same fear. And in their court rulings, you can see they're not looking at the evidence that was placed before the courts. They are repeating what they heard on the media.
So really just comes down to human error.
Human error. I don't think it's a lack of sincerity, although I do think at the same time, I do think we have a responsibility to use our God-given eyes and ears and brains and look at the facts and not be mesmerized by scary photographs that the media are showing 24 hours a day on the on the internet.
That's right. I was listening to your conversation with Trish Wood. She has also been on the podcast, and we were talking about the Emergencies Act, and the judge really did a good job of removing his personal opinion. He didn't agree with the convoy, and actually did his job based on the law, based on the facts. That seems like that's something rare these days. What can you say about that ruling? Because I was thinking about it the other day, and we're just such a distracted society, and there's constant new inflammatory news of the day. And I was at the Tucker Carlson event when that went down, when we had a ruling finally in our favor. What came of that? Did anything come of that other than it was proven that that decision was illegal and not in the best interests of Canadians? But what came of it?
Well, on the legal level, and the federal government is appealing it. I think the federal government's going to have a very uphill fight because the judge made it very clear, and I think this is helpful. Judges are allowed to have, judges are human, and the same way that you and I, we have our personal prejudices. Maybe you love unions, maybe you hate unions, maybe you think that stopping animal cruelty should be a really high priority. Maybe you think that's kind of not that high of a priority. Whatever, right? There's 100 issues. We all have our biases and prejudices. So do judges. That's perfectly fair, and that you can't expect anything else. What we can and should expect is that a judge would rise above his or her personal biases and prejudices and rule based on the facts according to law. And that's what this judge did. Because when you read the ruling, it's pretty clear, it's very clear that this judge who ruled that Trudeau acted illegally when declaring a national emergency, and that it was illegal and against our constitutional right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure with the bank accounts being frozen. The judge makes it very clear he did not like Tamara Leech and Chris Barber and Freedom Convoy. He thought the protesters were not just causing merely an inconvenience, but that they were probably causing some real harm, seems to be his view. That they were probably racist and white supremacist and criminal, and they were probably dangerous. So he has a very negative view of Freedom Convoy. And then he goes on to look at the provisions of the Emergencies Act, and he says, based on the facts, these requirements were not met. And so he ruled against the federal government. Now, what's come of it is that it does not have a direct legal consequence on, for example, the Justice Center's paying for lawyers to defend Chris Barber in the criminal prosecution. So the ruling that the Emergencies Act was illegal does not have a direct legal impact on, for example, criminal prosecutions against Tamara Leech and Chris Barber. However, it does have a huge impact on the judiciary, because this judge has made it very clear to all of his colleagues in Ottawa and across the country that, yes, it's okay to rule against the federal government.
Mhm.
And even if you dislike Freedom Convoy, even if you thought that lockdowns were, a fantastic and necessary thing, we still need to. So there's a very powerful psychological impact that's going to play itself out in the weeks and months ahead.
I'm sure he was not very popular in the lunchroom that day, though.
I think he's going to get fewer Christmas cards in December of 2024 than the number of Christmas cards he got in December of 2023. But kudos to him for it's fine to have the biases and prejudices. It's fine for a judge to have a dim view of Freedom Convoy, provided that he or she rules on the facts according to law.
Mhm. Will that work for anyone's favor? You know, we had a big GoFundMe that we were raising money for Kristen Nagel, for example, for her court bills. You mentioned Tamara Leech and Chris Barber. Will this benefit them favorably, or is it null? Is it separate?
I think, well, for criminal charges, I mean, each case the judge is supposed to look at the facts. And that's, by the way, that's not just criminal cases. That's every case. When there's challenges to COVID lockdowns, judges are supposed to look at the evidence that's placed before the courts, and they're not supposed to allow themselves to be influenced by media. Um, so each criminal case is unique and distinct. And so, whether Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, and in my view, they should both be acquitted. There's no crime that they committed, but whatever happens there, that's not going to should not have a direct bearing on other criminal cases, because the judge has to look at the facts in each individual case.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's wild to me that we have murderers and rapists just walking the street in Canada, bank accounts not frozen, and then we have people like Chris Barber who is charged with mischief.
Which, by the way, if you're found guilty of that, typically there's no jail time, unless the mischief involved, destroying $1 million computer or something, of high value. But generally speaking, if you are convicted of mischief, you're not going to spend time in jail. And yet Tamara Leach spent 49 days in jail. It was just a disgrace to see the Ottawa law enforcement, sending two people out to Alberta to arrest her and forcibly bring her back to Ontario to spend more time in jail over an alleged uh, and I think unjustified charge that she had breached her bail conditions. The whole thing, the resource allocation that the Crown in Ottawa is putting into this is an absolute disgrace.
For Trudeau and Krista Freeland to fight this, do they get to lean into the bottomless pit of taxpayer dollars to fight this?
I would sincerely hope that neither Justin Trudeau nor Krista Freeland nor Ontario Premier Doug Ford is having any communication whatsoever with the Crown prosecutors in Ottawa. If they did, that would be illegal and unethical. We Part of the rule of law is a separation between the police and prosecutors have to be independent,
Mhm.
so that the Prime Minister of Canada or a Premier of a province is not in a position that if his brother or his best friend or his cousin gets charged with impaired driving, a Premier should not be able to pick up the phone and tell the police or the prosecutors, "Hey, go easy on this guy. He's my brother." You need to have a separation there. So I would hope that there's no interference. Having said that, even if there's no interference, I think it's disgraceful for the police and Crown prosecutors to be devoting huge resources to prosecuting Tamara Leach and Chris Barber when they're participating in a peaceful protest. And there's a double standard. So even if the Crown was correct in prosecuting Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, uh, you've seen blatant violations of the law. For example, in Manitoba on Canada Day 2021, some protesters tore down and damaged a large statue of Queen Victoria that was at the legislature grounds, and police just stood by and watched. And even though they had ample videotape, it would have been easy to criminally charge these people with what is a crime. To destroy property is a crime. They did it in broad daylight with police watching, and there's no law enforcement. Why? Well, presumably it's because the authorities thought, well, they're protesting for a good cause. It's about every child matters. It's against Indian residential schools. It's against colonialism. And so these people are not charged for criminal conduct because the government thinks they're protesting for the right reasons. And that's just completely wrong. You have to apply the law consistently across the board.
I was thinking that today as I was watching some of the protests over the war in the Middle East, and I'm not here to pick a side by any means, but there were people marching in the streets, calling for violence against Jewish people, and I had to look at that and think, nobody's getting their bank accounts frozen. I don't see anyone being beaten by horses. You know, when I worked with the documentary team, I watched hours upon hours of video of people holding hands and praying and getting pepper sprayed in the face and stomped on. No one was calling for violence. So you're right. This is not being treated fairly. The only difference is this protest was against the government.
It's the way the law should operate regarding protests. It's actually very, very simple. If the protesters are breaking the law, so for example, advocating for genocide of a people group, an identifiable group based on race, religion, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, disability, if you, the willful promotion of hatred against an identifiable group is criminal code offense. Advocating for genocide or the killing of an identifiable group is criminal code. Destroying property is violation of criminal code. Obstructing a highway so that you're blocking traffic is a criminal code offense. Uh, Conversely, protesting peacefully on a sidewalk is not criminal. There were probably infractions of some municipal bylaws or maybe some provincial laws in Ottawa during Freedom Convoy. I'm not saying necessarily, but there was no criminal conduct there. So basically, what the police have to do, and it's very simple, is you look only at the behavior. You don't look at, are they pro-Israel? Are they pro-Palestine? Are they pro-life? Are they pro-choice? Are they pro-lockdown, anti-lockdown? Are they protesting for the environment, for Aboriginal rights? It just, you don't look at the issue. You only look at the behavior, and there should be that one standard applied across the board, regardless of what the cause, the issue is, that the political issue that you're protesting about.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's definitely not what they're doing. I used to be a liberal and I can't anymore. They're so out of integrity. They're so very corrupt. And all their decisions seem to be based on politics and winning mass appeal, not to do with justice. Has your political views changed at all after going through this?
No, but what has changed is the people that people that I'm interacting with and fighting for freedom. It's a very interesting, very short story. Uh, Within the past year and a half or so, I was having coffee with a lawyer. She lives in Vancouver, but she was visiting Calgary, and she is like a lifelong NDP supporter, has always acted for unions, has acted for human rights, has acted for human rights complainants, and kind of what you would call left wing, for lack of a better word. And she said she's lost a lot of friends during lockdowns and vaccine passports. She thought that all of her NDP friends would just obviously be in favor of human rights, and the unions would stand up for workers when workers were getting threatened with job loss over not getting injected with a substance for which there's no long-term safety data, and which did not stop the spread. And she was just appalled at her own friends that the unions were not representing the workers and the NDP was not standing up for the little guy. And so she lost friends. And I said, well, I have exactly the same experience because my politics, and I don't like one word labels, but people would say I'm on the right because I believe in uh, small government and lower taxes and so on and so forth. And I had the same experience as her, that there are people that I thought would stand up for religious freedom and not be cheering on the likes of Jason Kenney when he's throwing pastors in jail.
Yep.
So I had a lot of people that I've been friends with for decades, that I thought were fellow travelers, that we had a similar vision of justice. And these people are like, they're pro lockdown and they're pro vaccine passport. And I'm still shocked over it. So my politics haven't changed. I'm as pro freedom as always, but the people that I now associate with, that's now a different group of people from what it was 4 years ago.
Well, and I joke, if you're an actual liberal, you need to be voting conservative right now because they are the only ones that are advocating for human rights, personal liberties, everyone live their life how you like really want to. And it's so funny to hear people on the left calling people on the right fascists while cheering on big government, totalitarian institutional control, word and thought policing. I'm like, do you know what that word means? Clear, like, I don't need to ask that. Clearly, you don't know what that word means because that's you. The anti-fascists are asking for laws around compelled speech. Have you lost your mind?
Well, one of the characteristics of fascism is this arrogant intolerance where the fascists were so fascists in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. The most well known ones were, Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany, although many historians would say he was so different from Mussolini that he might not qualify as fascist. But anyway, that National Socialism is not fascism. We had Franco in Spain, but almost every country in Europe had a fascist movement. Even uh, uh, England, Great Britain, Belgium, Portugal, Hungary, Romania, Poland, the Netherlands, like everywhere in Europe, there were fascist movements. And these people were so convinced of the rightness of their own cause that they felt entitled to shut down others who disagreed. And so in Germany, as just one example, you'd have the brown shirts would go into the political party meetings of the communists, the social democrats, and they break up these meetings. And so that was cancel culture, but in a very, physically violent way. And now in Canada, we have woke people, woke fascists who are so arrogant in their beliefs that they are absolutely right in their beliefs that they are willing to silence people who disagree with them. And that's just the antithesis of classical liberalism, which is that freedom of expression is a cornerstone of democracy. So it is fair to call these people fascists. If you try to silence somebody else, you're a fascist.
That's right. So, John, I've interviewed a lot of doctors, nurses, educators on this podcast, and they were all in this position where if they stepped out of line with what was expected of them of their institution, they were at threat of losing so much. Not only friends and peers, but like their actual professions. Is this different for lawyers? And going through what you have gone through with the Freedom Convoy, with the constitutional challenges that you're facing, has there been any point, or do you think there's one coming up where you think that you'll personally be in a precarious position by fighting for the things that you are? Like, for example, I am potentially doing something dangerous right now because of the new legislation and hate bills coming. Carla Treadway's probably going to prison if this thing passes. Are you worried about your role fighting against the government, considering the current climate?
Yes, I think it's a huge problem where, for example, the College of Psychologists of Ontario has commenced disciplinary proceedings against Jordan Peterson, and they want to subject him to social media training. Um, I think it's
See,
just pure. I think it's just pure jealousy. There's no other psychologist in Ontario that's nearly as famous, and I don't think they have any qualifications to teach Jordan Peterson anything about. The guy's a social media giant. But we see disconcerting trends. The worst offenders in recent years have been the colleges of physicians and surgeons who have uh, traditionally had an appropriate role in enforcing a code of ethics. So, for example, if a doctor had sex with a patient, that's unethical. There would be disciplinary proceedings, and the doctor could get his license pulled. If a doctor was really rude to a patient or verbally abusive or something, that could be reported to the college. If the doctor failed to properly advise of the harms and benefits of a potential treatment, so they were enforcing a code of ethics, and that's all well and good. They did not interfere in the doctor-patient relationship pre-2020. So you had a healthy debate about all kinds of issues. Is the liberation therapy a good treatment for multiple sclerosis? Yes or no? You might remember that debate from a few years ago. And the doctors, some people said it was a great treatment for MS, and others said it was harmful, and others said it was useless. The college did not insert itself into that debate about whether this was a good treatment or not. And there's medical issues all the time. Is anti-cholesterol medication, does it do more good than harm? Different doctors will have different positions. But now, after 2020, suddenly the college tells doctors, you must encourage all your patients to get vaccinated. You cannot grant vaccine exemptions. This is just uh, this is so toxic and so totalitarian that you have a government body jumps right into the doctor-patient relationship. I know one nurse in Calgary who, in early 2021, when the vaccines were optional, her doctor told her, "Do not get this vaccine based on your medical condition." Blah 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 blah, and told her why she should not get this vaccine. Well, fast forward to September, Jason Kenney breaks another promise and makes vaccination mandatory on threat of getting expelled from university and losing your job and becoming a second-class citizen. The same woman whose doctor told her, do not get this vaccine, she goes back to her doctor and says, can I please get a note for a vaccine exemption? And the doctor said, no, I'm not giving you that. Why? Because he could lose his license. So colleges have been terrible. They have wrongfully prosecuted doctors over expressing their opposition to lockdowns and vaccine passports. And they're the worst offenders, but you've got law societies. I can give you examples of that as well, of what they've been corrupted by woke ideology.
Hmm.
Um,
So your profession wasn't free from that.
well, in Ontario, you might recall in 2018, the Law Society of Ontario made it mandatory for every lawyer to check off a box promising that they would, in their personal lives, they would promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. And if you didn't tick off the box, that you could not practice law in Ontario. That is just nakedly totalitarian. That is exactly the kind of thing that communists and Nazis did, is they would force people to publicly express an allegiance to the reigning ideology. You did not have the freedom to just be silent, and you actually had to express your support for the regime's ideology. And so we saw this in Ontario. Um, Here in Alberta, lawyers, in order to practice law, must complete this woke uh, anti colonization course. We have to go through and check off the boxes, and you have to complete this very biased course in order to practice law. If you don't complete the course, you cannot practice law in Alberta. And so, yeah, law societies are not friends of charter freedoms of expression.
Hmm. Imagine if you were a lawyer and you were forced to do a Christian reprogramming camp. Imagine the backlash, or pick any religion. It doesn't have to be Christianity, but imagine that kind of compelled thought and speech. People would lose their minds.
They would. Well, the other thing is, even if the course was not biased, it is a political choice, because the Law Society, if they had a representative in on this podcast and we had a three-way discussion, they would say, well, it's very important for lawyers to be familiar with Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal people and so on. And this is important. To which I would say, yes, that is important. But then is it not also important that all lawyers have a very solid understanding of what happened in Germany in the 1920s and 30s and how their democracy fell apart? And is it not important for every lawyer to know about the Holodomor, which was Stalin's deliberate starvation of millions of Ukrainians in the 1930s? Is it not important to learn about pick your topic. There's all kinds of things that it's important to know about it. But if the Law Society picks any issue and says, well, lawyers need training on this issue, but not other issues, they have now made a political choice. And that's exactly what the Alberta Law Society has done. So even if, they have a valid point, of course, we should know more about Aboriginals and about the history of Aboriginals, pre-Canada and since 1867. Of course, that's worthwhile. But if you pick that as the one thing that lawyers must learn about to the exclusion of everything else, that is an inappropriate political choice.
Well, I mean, I think there's a big reason why educational institutions aren't teaching things like uh, basic economics, for example, all throughout high school. And especially the younger generation, myself included, in school, I never learned about communism. I never learned about socialism. I did not learn about economics, budgeting, taxes, um, really some very serious, important things that I really needed to learn. And university kids right now are being pumped out believing that socialism is what Canada currently is because we have socialist healthcare, and that means we take care of other people without any understanding of history, knowing that under true socialist nations, it's resulted in mass starvation and death every single time. And people have no idea. They think capitalism is bad. And I don't know, this might be a little tinfoily for you, but we have young people being bred to believe that personal responsibility is bad, that we need to glorify victim culture, that we need to be dependent on big government, that socialism means that you like taking care of people, capitalism is evil. But really, they have no historical context or really a basic understanding, even of what politics is and what the parties represent.
Well, I routinely encourage parents to take their kids out of public schools and put them into private school. And if there's no appropriate private school, because some private schools, they use the same garbage curriculum that the public schools are using, homeschool your kids. And yeah, for many people, it would be a big sacrifice, would probably mean having to rely on one income, which would be a challenge if a family is accustomed to having both parents work and both parents earn similar amounts. But when you've got woke activists publicly stating it's really important to get the kids while they're young and tell 4-year-olds, tell 5-year-olds, start introducing the gender unicorn and start telling 6-year-olds that there's no such thing as girls, there's no such thing as boys. It's so psychologically damaging. Like if I told you that you were not a woman, you'd probably laugh and shrug it
Mhm.
off. You're not going to be psychologically crippled if I told you that you're not a woman. But if you were 6 years old and I was your teacher and I said, you know what, you're not a girl because girls are not real. If you're 6 years old and I'm an authority figure like a teacher, that's
Mhm.
going to be devastating to you. And
Right.
so we've got these ideologues that want to promote trans ideology as early as possible and age inappropriate sex education. uh, there's a right time and a place to get educated, and it's not necessarily in a classroom with 29 other kids being taught things by total stranger. And so and the curriculum, it's devoid of history. It presents only one side on the theory that mankind controls the weather. Climate change is real, nobody denies that, but the real issue is, are we 8 billion people in control of the weather? And there should be debate about that, but it's only one side that gets
Mhm.
presented. There should be debate about lockdowns and vaccine passports. There should be debate about uh, all kinds of things. And anyway, I could go on that point, but I think it's important for parents to simply take their kids out of public school and homeschool them or put them in private schools, because if not, we've got a horrible future ahead. If you have naive, ignorant people that with no knowledge of history, who have not been taught how to think, who cannot handle dealing with two or three different perspectives and using their reasoning faculties, that's a very dangerous future if we're going to be governed by people that cannot reason and cannot think and that are ignorant of history.
and unwilling to debate. And that's an interesting point about education too. And again, if you understood history, you would know that the early sexualization of children and confusion is right from the Marxist playbook, with the goal to disrupt the child and to make them so disillusioned and upset with their parents for not understanding them that they break away from the family and they join the revolution. But of course people aren't taught that in school, and I can't say I blame them, because I didn't start reading books on communism until 2020. And when I started really diving in, I was like, oh. And really, I think that's what we're actually fighting for. I don't think people understand that the whole geopolitical atmosphere is changing, that, they're still clinging to their party because they believe that it's the party that it used to be. And I don't think people understand that the parties themselves are shifting and changing. And when we say things like we're fighting for freedom, we're fighting for democracy, they say, well, that's ridiculous. I'm a liberal. That has always been safe. This is Canada. And in a world that is obsessed with talking about privilege, we have to watch our Western privilege. The idea that, well, nothing bad like that would happen here. That only happens in Eastern Europe. That only happens in the Middle East. That could never happen here.
Well, the freezing of bank accounts in February of 2022, if that wasn't a wake up call, I don't know what would be. This is the kind of thing that would happen in a so-called banana republic, as we've referred to some Central American regimes that are, if they've got a dictator that collaborates with outside industrial interests, and there's no democracy. And there are countries in the world where, if you criticize the president, all of a sudden the next day you're criminally charged with murder or rape or extortion or fraud. You're suddenly criminally charged and you're in jail. And this coincidentally happens just 24 hours after you've publicly criticized the president. And people know, okay, this is like the criminal justice system gets abused. And we've got this exactly in Canada with criminal charges against peaceful protesters in Ottawa. They did not commit any acts of violence. They didn't vandalize anything. They didn't vandalize cars. They didn't smash in store windows. They didn't obstruct police. They didn't utter threats. They're there peacefully, and they get criminal charges levied against them, and that's a gross abuse of uh, the way that the police and prosecutors are supposed to be operating. So we have become to a considerable extent. I mean, it could be worse, but we've taken some very big steps towards becoming a banana republic with polar bears, where if you criticize if you're Tamara Leech and the prime minister hates your guts because you're a small Métis woman speaking out against vaccine passports, and the prime minister can't stand it, well, and then she gets criminally charged, spends 18 days in jail initially, and then later on another 35 or so days in jail for alleged breach of bail conditions.
Mm-hmm. I
Just a
mean,
disgrace. So yeah, I like the way you've characterized that. It's not, we can't have this privilege to say, oh no, this will never happen to us, because we are, Western. We're a Western democracy, so we're immune from becoming a banana republic.
that's right. I mean, the first wake up call should have been the mandates and the way the government handled a peaceful protest. When people say, "Well, what could they have done?" Well, he could have talked to them. The second wake up should have been the frozen bank accounts. That should have rattled every Canadian to their core, whether they supported the protest or not. Then all of a sudden, you couldn't see the news on social media when it started becoming really unfavorable for the government. That should have woke people up. And now we're all the way to the hate speech bill, where we have very 1984, Carla Treadway might go to prison if someone is financially incentivized to report her for something she might say.
It is that scary. Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. Um, the one of the what is perhaps the scariest provision of all is the preemptive punishment. So if my next door neighbor fears that I'm going to commit a hate speech crime. So I'm going to willfully promote hatred against an identifiable group, or I'm going to advocate for genocide against an identifiable group. Those are criminal code offenses. If my neighbor fears that I'm going to do that, I'm going to be hauled before a provincial court judge. And if the judge feels that my neighbor has reasonable basis for her fear, the judge could say, okay, Mr. Carpay, I'm placing you under house arrest and a curfew, and you have to wear an ankle bracelet. You are to turn in your legally acquired and legally owned firearms, and you are not to communicate with certain people. You're not allowed to go to certain places. If the judge can place all these restrictions on me, again, I haven't committed any crime. And then if I say, well, I'm not going to abide by those restrictions, if I refuse to comply, I can then be locked up in jail for up to 2 years. And again, having not done anything, this is totalitarian creepiness, and uh, you know, people have to wake up to this. This is a real bill before Parliament that has a good chance of passing if the Liberals can get support from the NDP or the Bloc or both. It's likely to get passed. That said, we do have a petition, and people should contact their MPs. We need to fight this, and we can't just sit back and watch.
Really, you think it's likely? I was hoping it was so left field that no one could possibly support this.
Yeah, but the same could be said about unscientific lockdown policies that inflicted massive harm and suffering on people. When the government was nakedly dishonest uh, about the fact that this was a big experiment, they were saying this is evidence based. This is backed up by science. Well, no, the truth is it was an experiment. And if the government had had a shred of honesty and integrity, they would have brought forward lockdowns with the messaging that this is a brand new experiment. It's never been tried before in human history. We're going to watch and see how well the experiment is working or not. We're going to look at lockdown harms and track them, measure them. We're going to see what benefits are coming. We're going to weigh the harms and the benefits. If there had been some intellectual honesty, if there had been some moral integrity, the government would have said, we are conducting a big experiment, and we're going to honestly and objectively weigh the pros and cons. And if it's not working out well, we're going to stop the experiment. That would have been an honest approach that I could have bought into. And I would have said, okay, well, let's try the experiment. But no, they said, this is evidence based. This is what the science says. We are the scientists. And if you disagree with lockdowns, you're either anti science, or you're just a
Right.
bad you're a bad person who doesn't care about people dying. That's the
Yeah.
message. Very dishonest.
I mean, I'm laughing. It's more of a nervous laughter because I know I'm probably going to prison under this new regime, but
Or you might not go to jail, but you're going to have to you could be subject to an order that you pay $50,000 to the federal government plus $20,000 to a complainant, because human rights bureaucrats subjectively decided that what you said is hateful,
Mhm.
which is very subjective because hate is an emotion, and two people can see or read or listen to the same thing, and one will say it's hateful, the other one will say it's not hateful. Totally
That's right.
subjective.
Well, and even there's that part in the bill about promoting content that results in a disruption of service. So, what's that? That's a video of someone holding a Canadian flag on a bridge, because what does that promote? A protest that was a disruption of service. So, something even very, very innocent that could land you in the hot seat under this bill.
The other scary aspect is that the federal cabinet, if this bill passes in its current form, by the way, I would encourage people sign our petition at www.jccf, Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms. I think for viewers, the logo is right behind me. Um, Sign our petition against the Online Harms Act. We've already delivered 55,500 signatures to the Prime Minister's office in early April, and we are collecting more signatures to deliver another batch. But if this bill passes in its current form, the federal cabinet will be authorized to create censorship regulations that will be imposed on all social media providers. These regulations will be made in secret. They will not go to a vote in Parliament. There will be no public debate, no public discussion. And then this Digital Safety Commission will be authorized to enforce the censorship regulations that are passed by the federal cabinet. I always say to people, beware when politicians talk about safety. In France, during the French Revolution, during the Reign of Terror, 1793, it was the Committee of Public Safety that chopped off the heads of over 16,000 Frenchmen. Committee of Public Safety chopping off the heads of thousands of people. So now we have a Digital Safety Commission. Very scary.
Well, when they rounded up Jewish people in the Holocaust to go and have showers to keep them clean, to prevent them from disease, that's another horrific example of this is for your safety. And that was actually what was around the corner. So we have terrifying problems, terrifying.
There's,
Um,
I got a comment on that too. That what a lot of people don't understand about German history, a lot of people mistakenly think that Hitler seized power on a Tuesday and by Wednesday morning they're marching people off to the gas chambers. Far from it. There were 8 years of daily media indoctrination in Germany. The government controlled the media, which at that time was newspapers and radio. There's no television. Either it hadn't been invented, or if it had been, it was not widespread amongst the people. The government controlled the media, and every day the Germans were told that the Jews were evil, the Jews were the source of Germany's problems, unemployment, and other problems. And so being subjected to daily propaganda for 8 years by radio and newspapers, it was only later in the early 1940s that you got sort of the mass genocide. So I want to clarify, like, I would never ever compare the Holocaust to anything that we've seen in the past 4 years. However, what's important to recognize is that the Holocaust didn't happen overnight. It was preceded by 8 years of daily media indoctrination. And
that's
that's
right.
something a lot of Canadians are not aware of.
That's right. The beginning. This is the beginning. There's a book called They Thought They Were Free. And it started off very innocent, and it started off with the control of institutions and medicine and who could get what medicine. And then it went into education. And when you read that book and you see the step by step by step, the uh, the year that we're living right now compared to the beginning of that time is uncanny.
Well, things typically happen, things build on uh, each other step by step. And you have to fight these small, something that might appear pretty small, like you're right to have Christmas dinner with both of your parents, or for older people, for being able to have Christmas dinner with your adult children and with your grandchildren. uh, Something that you might think is small, but it's not, though, because if you can't have the freedom in a small thing, like who you're going to have Christmas dinner with, then you're not going to have your freedom in the bigger questions either. So it's on these relatively seemingly small issues that we have to fight tooth and nail to defend our freedoms.
I think the JCCF is one organization that is giving people a lot of hope. The Reclaiming Canada conference is the first thing that I've seen in a long time that is also giving me some hope, because I think a lot of people are burnt out. They are overwhelmed. They're losing faith in all institutions, not just government. They're losing faith in politics. And I think a lot of people are getting that, yeah, they're just tired. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to start. They know it's a problem. They're maybe starting to check out. And this event that you'll be speaking at seems like one of those things that might actually start a movement that might spark hope. You know, it's described as Take Back Alberta meets Jordan Peterson's art conference, and that seems really accurate to me. Can you tell me, you're going to be one of the speakers there, what made you get involved with the Reclaiming Canada conference, and what can we expect to hear from you there?
Well, I went to the conference in 2023, and it was fantastic. It was so encouraging to hear and see uh, these brilliant academics and medical doctors and lawyers and leaders of grassroots citizens groups. So there are so many um, very intelligent, very qualified, very competent, very thoughtful, very educated people that have been silenced by government funded media. But you know, the government funded media are dying a well-deserved death. Every day they are getting smaller and weaker, and there are fewer and fewer people listening to the CBC and other government funded media. But I was just super encouraged by the conference to see so many people there and to be able to listen to these wonderful speakers share their insights. And I think we're going to see something similar in the conference in June of 2024, where it will be a source of encouragement and inspiration. And when you attend a conference like that, you realize you're not alone, and it's a very welcome retreat and an opportunity to learn and to recharge your batteries. And I just think it's a great opportunity for anybody, especially if you live on Vancouver Island. It's worth a trip to Victoria, but I believe it's going to be accessible as well for via Zoom for people all across Canada to attend.
I'm flying all the way from Ontario for it. I can't wait. And they have a big focus on, yes, preserving democracy, but it's about combating censorship and disinformation from these institutions that are supposed to be protecting the citizens, and they're not. Would you say that free speech is the most important right that we should be focused on right now?
Well, definitely. The thing about free speech is that if you lost all of your rights and freedoms, but kept your freedom of expression, you could use your freedom of expression to win back all the rights and freedoms that you've lost. But if you lose your freedom of expression, you're no longer in a position to defend yourself against the attacks against all the other rights and freedoms. And so it is the cornerstone of democracy. It has been recognized as such by the Supreme Court of Canada in some of its rulings that freedom of speech, we need that for democracy. You have no democracy without freedom of speech. You have you handicap the quest for truth. If you don't have freedom of speech, you're not free to discover, to learn, to debate, to speak out uh, in all realms, whether it's scientific truth, philosophical truth, political truth, religious truth. Wherever you're seeking truth, you need freedom of inquiry. And you need to be able to challenge ideas that you think are false. You need to be able to speak freely. And it's while we're speaking that we develop our thoughts while we're speaking about something. And if you take away that basic right to speak, you're also you prevent people from thinking if you can't speak freely. So it's certainly it's the Justice Center's top priority in 2024, and I know it's also a high priority for lots of other groups and individuals.
It's interesting you mentioned uh, debate. And the conference is not political, yet we are having one heck of a time finding people on the left that are willing to come and have rational, honest, open, reasonable debate. In fact, I was in charge of trying to find some speakers on the left, and said try and find some staunch NDP supporters, liberal supporters who are willing to have a conversation, who are like reasonable, who still value yeah, those actual values of the left. And I am having a hard time, John. I can think of Michael Schellenberger. That's it. But you mentioned someone, pardon me, from the NDP. Yeah, this is a challenge. It seems to be the people that are more right-leaning who are still willing to have open and honest debate.
Yeah, personally, I try to stay away from left and right because they have a lot of baggage, and
There.
there's always been a philosophical problem because there are many different ideas in politics, and if you try to shove a whole diversity of ideas into whether it's uh, left, far left, right,
Mhm.
moderate right, far right, center, it just doesn't really work philosophically. So I try to stay away from like I sometimes talk about left and right. I try to minimize how often I do it. I
Mhm.
think we need a new political spectrum where on one side, and I won't say it's the left or the right side, but on one side you have tyranny, and you have different kinds of tyranny. You can have communism, you can have fascism, you can have national socialism, you can have theocracy, you can have a banana republic that doesn't believe in any philosophy other than keeping the current dictator in power. So you have oppression and tyranny on one side of the spectrum, and then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the free society where we value and cherish the the inherent worth of every individual, and we say that the governments have to respect these basic human rights, these basic constitutional freedoms have to be respected by government, and that's kind of a new spectrum that I think we can look at. It will also be imperfect because there's more than two ideas in politics, but I think it would be a better replacement than the old left and right. I think that's gone by the wayside.
I can get on board with that. Tyranny or kind, reasonable humans.
Yeah,
Pick a
exactly.
team. Well, John, thank you so much. I know your time's valuable. I'll end this here. Where can people learn more about the JCCF if they want to donate, if they want to get involved, or the work? I know you're also doing a lot of articles for different publications right now, your podcast. Where's the best place to find you?
Our website's probably the best place, www.jccf.ca. So JCCF is Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms, www.jccf.ca. We have a free email newsletter that you can sign up for. And not only is it the most interesting newsletter you'll ever read, but we only send it out about twice a month. So you can sign up for that and get updates on what's going on with our court actions all over Canada and our other events and educational initiatives.
Amazing. I'll make sure to link those in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time and all the work that you're doing, and I'll see you in June.
Look forward to seeing you in person in June. And thanks a lot for the interview. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, John.